came upon the Sigma Chi boys the morning after. And in that moment, we realized that not only, that it wasn't just, our family healed one way, but everybody needed to heal from this. And we saw it in an instant, kind of seeing all of his friends. And it doesn't change the outcome. Even looking ahead at the trial coming up in October now, we choose to not, it does not change the outcome of our family, and it's energy that we need to put into healing our kids and, getting back to a new family dynamics and working on that.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, this is difficult subject matter. Grieving is tough. And the proper way to grieve is the road less traveled. Do you know how to grieve? Does anyone know how to grieve? What is the right way to grieve? What is the right way to grieve in a situation like this? And so I'm certainly not coming into this judgmental or insensitive. It's something that where one feels a great deal of compassion. Having been in true crime for years, the default setting when it comes to grieving that I've seen as an author seems to be invariably trying to get back to normal as quickly as possible. But grief can't be rushed. Grief can't be scheduled or postponed. And I think you can even say, can grief be channeled? It's there whether you ignore it, channel it, or try to alchemize it. The only way to sort of deal with grief is sort of let it be, in a way. Let it exist. Let it do its thing. We are a society, actually, that doesn't know how to grieve. A society that doesn't know how to deal with trauma for precisely the reason that grief and grieving is hidden, often buried in the subconscious. Even in a trial setting, when you're dealing with things like human remains and a deceased victim, you get a very strong sense that even people dealing with murder trials don't know how to deal with the dead. They don't know whether we should look at the remains or not look at them, cover the screens over or not. And so one sign that you're repressing these feelings is recurring bad dreams. Those thoughts need to express themselves. And by the way, you might think that death is a very difficult subject. Well, you know what? It is part of life. It's going to happen to those around you, whether you avoid it or not. It's going to happen to you, whether you think about it or whether you don't think about it. And so maybe it is worth thinking about, since it's a certainty. It's an absolute certainty. On social media, we're taught to cheerlead our best and brightest moments and hide or avoid or simply deny the difficulties, our traumas, right? In the IDAHO students' case, we see a seemingly perfect family channeling their grief in a particular way. Part of that process is not attending the trial because, as they say, it won't change the outcome. Well, it won't bring Ethan back, but it might change the outcome for Ethan's killer. And also beyond that, it might change the outcome for the society that surrounds that trial, the society that is looking on. And who would be better representatives of that society than Ethan's parents? This is certainly tricky subject matter, but before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, on this channel, we try to deal with somewhat more cerebral issues. We don't just take a gratuitous interest in the crime. We think about society's interest. We think about what can we learn as people, as families, as a community from some of these tears in the fabric of society. If that's something that interests you, please like, share. If you're enjoying this episode, you're finding it edifying, useful, interesting, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So for me, the guideline is this, and you can leave in the comments whether you think it's simplistic or naive or not not something that you agree with. The guideline in terms of how you deal with grief, especially in a situation like this, a murder trial, is if I was murdered, would I want my murderer's narrative to go unopposed? Would I want my murderer on trial to have no one there to represent me? Would I want someone to speak up for me? Would I want my story to be told? How do you feel about those questions? Now, according to Fox News, quote, standing in a tulip field not far from where his triplets grew up in Skagit Valley, Washington, Ethan's father, Jim, fought back tears as he remembered the last time he spoke to his son, Ethan. And he said that we said goodbye in the parking lot Saturday night, obviously in Moscow. He said they were in the Sigma Chi house and gave him a hug and told him to be safe. And that was the last time.
Tough not having here. Stace and I get up and watch the sunrise and drink our coffee and cry in your coffee.
Jim and Stacy left the University of Idaho, left Moscow on November 6th. And it was kind of ironic. They were trading high fives, feeling satisfied that their kids were having the time of their lives. You know, you kind of get the idea that the parents high-fived each other saying, job done, well done. And so I think what is easy for grieving parents and grieving families to miss is that their story actually allows others who have experienced loss and are all blocked up in some area to experience a kind of healing. And so in a high-profile scenario, the pain, the tears, the emotion, the anger, all of that is emotional reality brought to the surface. And sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes that is needed for authentic healing to take place, not only of the people at the center of this, but also other people as well. Through seeing someone else grieve, you can grieve. You find yourself crying as well. You find yourself going into areas that you'd not thought about, that you need to think about. And of course, it's hard to allow oneself to do all of that publicly with the cameras rolling. I have to say, of all the parents in this story, Ethan seemed very balanced, very eloquent, very sensible, also very good parents. And so it's a real shame they don't see value in attending the trial. I recently attended the Valo trial in person in Boise, Idaho, and on a daily basis, that's the journalists and media practitioners, we saw family members like Kay and Larry Woodcock. And I think what we saw was courage and pain, anger, yes, as well. But also we saw these family members bringing accountability and love and seeing justice done with grace and kindness and open-heartedness. They also chose which court days to avoid when, for example, human remains were shown. And they were also offered a voice to tell the court their story of a life they knew and lost. And sometimes they responded to testimony on a particular day, and the media got a deeper sense, a deeper understanding of what was actually going on, in the reality and the emotional reality of this case. I think it's great that Ethan was having the time of his life, and we heard the same thing from Maddie's father, that Maddie was also getting the sort of life that she deserved. And I think that's the thing that embittered Kohberger as much as it did. I think that is also part of the narrative, is to know what was this thing that Kohberger, or certainly the prime suspect, allegedly, apparently, triggered him so much, upset him so much, and to some extent that aspect resonating with some part in him that needed that. Because whoever committed this crime wasn't having the time of his life, and that is what makes Kohberger quite a good suspect here. He didn't seem terribly happy. He didn't seem terribly like part of the life of the party or of any party. He was, in his own orbit, excluded, criticized, sanctioned, limited, and most of all, isolated. That was the case in terms of his peers in class. That was the case in terms of his students. That was the case in terms of his colleagues, and that was the case in terms of the neighborhood where he was staying, where even his neighbors didn't want to really engage with him, because when they did, he spoke so much. And so when he looked on through those big windows and the glass sliding door of 112 King Road, he saw kids having the sort of life he wanted, the sort of life he desperately wanted. And so going back to the article in Fox News, Stacey and Jim say, quote, "We drove out of town," that's Moscow, that Sunday morning. So that it was literally on a Sunday morning that they left their young boy for the last time. And they say we literally high-fived each other that day. We literally congratulated each other. We were like, we've done it, they're adulting, they're kind, we've done it. We can rest easy. And so what about the parents of the suspect? Had they done it? Should they congratulate each other? And so they say there was no way they could have known what was coming. And is that true from both sides? In terms of Kohberger's past, was there no way they could have known what was coming? Again, it's great if Ethan and Maddie and Kaylee and Xana were all living their best lives. But I think in the middle of one's happiness, and I say this in terms of an individual, a class, a community, a society, a culture, a country that's happy. You know, how should America feel when there's a country in Europe that's at war? You know, one must consider the possibility that someone else might not be happy. If we don't make an effort to understand the dynamic here, then this could happen again. This whole idea of there was no way they could have known what was coming. Well, what about the fact that Kohberger was a criminology student in a criminology class, in a kind of criminology faculty? Was there really no way they could have known or seen what was coming? I personally am curious to know whether the way Kohberger was humiliated in front of his class was appropriate. You know, would that faculty do the exact same thing again? And if not, if other faculties have made note of the sort of protocols there need to be in dealing with issues, for example, in a student body, right? Have they changed those protocols? Do they need to change them? Because bullying at school, and bullying is part of the story, bullying at school and university level can leave lifelong scars, even when no obvious crime is ever committed. Stacey said, you know, it's a tough hand to be dealt, but we can't change the outcome. Well, losing someone you love, especially in such a horrible way, is a very tough hand. I've been in that situation myself recently, and I've seen different approaches to grief. I've seen pretending that it never happened. I've seen outright denial. I've seen the opposite, obsession. It's not healthy to fixate on someone who's no longer there. Letting go, or how you should let go or hold on, isn't something anyone can really tell you how or when or what to do. Only you can decide how much you can or should handle, and it is something that needs to be thought about. It needs to be contemplated, it needs to be discussed. And that is exactly what Stacey said they did do. She said they navigated through this time. She said, we just talked it out. We talked, we told stories, we cried. She said, one day I was walking by myself. And that is one of the best ways to deal with grief. By yourself, also with other people. Talking, but also being introspective, thinking. She said, I was crying so hard. And then I happened upon somebody, and she said, I thought they were going to call 911 on me. Allowing that grief to come to the surface, allowing it to be, is also important, it's also part of that process. But I want to talk about dealing with grief specifically within the context of true crime, and specifically within the context of a trial. Is the right way to deal with grief not to attend a trial? Is the right way to deal with grief to attend a trial and show no emotion? I've been through a murder trial where we saw parents extend clemency to their daughter's murderer and try to move on very quickly. And then they failed to do that. And today they are very much broken people. The thing is, reality doesn't move on. The person remains absent. The pain lingers. And one does have a hole in one's heart that never fully heals. What happens is, and I know that feeling, you're really desperate just to wake up and this horrible trauma has passed. But unfortunately it doesn't. It's a passage you have to go through. And so what happens is we do become better at dealing with that pain, but it's a gradual process. A trial is actually a valuable opportunity to face reality. A trial is designed to address wrongs and try to right them. A trial tries to put in place the necessary measures for wounded parties and communities to fix themselves and heal. But a trial can also be a learning and healing experience, and it can change the outcome for other communities. It can change the outcome for their own communities, but other communities can also learn from some of the things that have happened in a particular case. How should you respond? How much? And so ultimately, how much you put into a trial, how much you invest it with your head and your heart, is also how much it pays back. Recently, the trials of Alex Murdaugh and Laurie Vallow have been huge healing experiences for the wider community. And I think a lot of people will agree that some of the best testimonies came from family members. When you add days and days of dry testimony, evidence, information, facts, the necessary indignation was communicated by Laurie Vallow's son and her sister. In Alex Murdaugh's case, by the sister of his wife, his murdered wife, and also their housekeeper. And so I think there are conversations in this case where you have an isolated, awkward boy jealously watching a group of young girls, and in their midst is a magnanimous, socialized, likable, loved young man. What's the difference? What's the difference between Brian Kohberger and Ethan Chapin? Is it all nature? Is it all nurture? How could or should parents raise healthy, strong, good sons? How can the problem figures in our society be reconciled to society's embrace? You see some photos with a big group of happy young kids. Well, what about the kid that's not in that photo? Do you pretend that they're not there? How do families deal with drugs, and how can kids be raised so that they don't fall prey to drug addiction? I would suggest that drugs fill a hole in a young person's life, and that can only happen if instead of love there is loneliness. Stacey Chapin said, "I can honestly say I don't think we could spend more time with our kids and our family, and it's because of that we don't have that regret." And so can that be said about Kohberger? Did his parents spend as much time with him? In the same sort of setting, speedboats, family homes by the lake, comfort and joy and enjoyment. She went on to say, when you're a triplet, you have spent your whole life together with other people. Well, Brian also had two siblings. Was there a strong togetherness? The same kind of strong togetherness? And I would suggest not. And so it raises this question, how can troubled young men or their families behave differently? And how can society recognize them and perhaps take appropriate action? One thing I see in Ethan that I don't see in Brian is glue. Ethan is glued to his community and friends as well as his family. The glue that holds him to his family, kindness, thoughtfulness and just lightheartedness to some extent is the same glue that he's able to apply to others. Whereas Brian didn't really seem to have any friends. So this is one thing parents can encourage, socializing as opposed to withdrawing at home and allowing that withdrawal. Also, what role did social media have in this case? And what role should parents, institutions, or individuals have in protecting privacy and security? I mean, 2 families have filed tort claim notices against the city of Moscow. The family of Kaylee Gonzalez and I think Maddie Mogan. So who is responsible for keeping us safe? A city, social media companies, our friends, our parents, our teachers, our university professors? Or are we solely responsible for ourselves? Or are we all kind of collectively responsible? And when someone is murdered, who should take responsibility for their story? Well, isn't it a court? And so should a court take responsibility but not those close to them? Should those close to them not be in that court? Should stories be told in tulip fields and to the media or in books but not in court? Should the court be held in the court of public opinion, not in the actual court? A trial is actually a valuable opportunity to face reality. And once the trial is over, that opportunity to look reality in the eye is gone too. So I would encourage Ethan's family to do the difficult thing, to do the brave thing, especially since his siblings have already graduated. It may counterintuitively make real closure more realistic, and it may help Moscow and the University of Idaho find its way to authentic healing. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.